The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the kind of silence that follows noise, but a different kind, dense, heavy, almost alive. It pressed in from all sides as soon as I stepped out of the car. My shoes crunched softly on the gravel, but the sound was quickly swallowed by the forest around me. Trees stood like patient sentinels, their leaves whispering secrets I wasn't yet privy to. The air was cool and clean, laced with the scent of pine, damp soil, and something faintly sweet I couldn't name. I stood there for a moment, suitcase in one hand, yoga mat rolled under my arm, trying to absorb the shift from my regular world to this one. The retreat center was further in, past a footpath littered with leaves and half-buried roots. Signs had been hand-painted on slabs of wood, pointing toward Silent Zone, Meditation Meadow, and Forest Showers. I followed them, step by deliberate step, feeling strangely naked without my phone buzzing in my pocket, without a schedule to chase or a voice to respond to. Here, everything was slower. Time itself seemed reluctant to move. I checked in with a woman in linen pants who spoke in a whisper and handed me a map of the grounds along with a name tag I would never use. My sleeping assignment was written in careful handwriting at the bottom of the paper. Tent #7 shared. I felt something twist in my stomach. I hadn't realized I'd be sharing a tent. I told myself it didn't matter. I had come here to escape, to be still, to forget who I was for a while. Maybe a stranger would make that easier. Tent 7 was on the edge of the camp, tucked beneath a large maple that filtered the sun into golden patches across the canvas. It was more spacious than I expected. 2 sleeping mats, 2 folded blankets, and a narrow crate between them, acting as a shared nightstand. Someone was already there. A rucksack leaned against one of the mats, and beside it, a pair of sandals and a journal with a cracked leather cover. I took the other mat quietly and set my things down. I resisted the urge to peek into her belongings. Whoever she wasn't here. I wandered the grounds for a while, letting my body adjust to the new rhythm. People moved slowly here, their eyes cast downward, their hands resting gently at their sides or clasped behind their backs. No one spoke. Some nodded in acknowledgement. Others simply passed by like shadows. It was calming and unnerving all at once. My thoughts were louder without noise to compete with. They rose to the surface uninvited, memories I had packed away showing up in vivid flashes. A man's voice, a slammed door, the echo of a laugh I hadn't heard in years. I tried to breathe through it, to let the forest absorb it all. When I returned to the tent later that afternoon, she was there, sitting cross-legged on her mat, back straight, eyes closed. She had dark hair pulled into a knot at the nape of her neck, and her posture was almost unnervingly still. There was something about her that pulled the air toward her, like gravity, like the center of a quiet storm. I hesitated at the entrance, then stepped inside and lay down on my mat without a word. She didn't open her eyes. Her breathing was slow and measured, and I found mine sinking with hers without effort. That night, the temperature dropped. The forest air grew damp and cool, and the canvas walls of the tent did little to keep it out. I wrapped myself in my blanket and curled onto my side, facing the wall, listening to the sound of wind moving through the trees. Somewhere nearby, an owl called. My body ached from the unfamiliar firmness of the ground, from the tension I hadn't realized I carried. I couldn't sleep. I kept my eyes closed, but my mind buzzed. Thoughts I didn't want kept finding me. She moved at some point. I felt the faint shift in the mat beside mine, the whisper of fabric. Her breathing changed slightly, deepened. I told myself not to think about her, not to wonder what her name was, why she was here, what she had come to forget. I told myself not to imagine her reaching for her journal or how her voice might sound if we weren't in silence. I told myself not to notice the subtle scent of her skin, something warm and soft, a mixture of herbs and sweat and the forest itself. And yet, I noticed everything. The way her blanket rustled when she turned, the rhythm of her breath, steady as a metronome, the silence between us, not empty, but full of something thick and unspoken. Sharing a tent with a stranger should have felt awkward, but it didn't. It felt inevitable. Like this was where the retreat truly began, not on the meditation mat, but here, in the dark, beside someone whose name I didn't know, yet whose presence was starting to settle beneath my skin. In the early hours, just before dawn, I finally drifted into a restless sleep. I dreamed of trees, of rain falling in slow motion, of warm hands brushing against mine under the surface of still water. When I woke, the light was just beginning to leak through the canvas walls, painting everything in soft blue. She was gone again, and the tent was filled with the scent of morning. I lay there, staring at the curve of fabric above me, feeling more awake than I had in years. The silence no longer felt heavy. It felt full of her, of possibility, of something I hadn't come looking for but couldn't ignore. Something had begun, not with words, not with intention, but with breath, presence, and the quiet electricity of being near someone who, for reasons I didn't yet understand, felt like a mirror held up to a part of me I'd long stopped looking at. The second morning arrived, wrapped in a blanket of cool mist that clung to the earth and kissed the fabric of our tent. I woke slowly, emerging from shallow, fractured sleep with the awareness that I was not alone. Her presence was quiet but unmistakable, her breath steady, rhythmic, just a few feet away. My body lay still, curled within my sleeping bag, yet every part of me was reaching outward toward the warmth I knew existed in the narrow space that separated our mats. The intimacy of that nearness was electric, though nothing had been exchanged between us but air and silence. Through half-closed eyes, I watched a beam of sunlight push through the small opening in the tent seam, casting soft shadows across the canvas walls. Dust particles floated lazily through the golden light, and for a moment the world outside our tent ceased to matter. All I could hear was the slow inhale and exhale of her breath, each cycle grounding me in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't sensual, not yet, but it was undeniably alive. Every breath she took made my chest rise, made my skin more aware of its own surface, its edges, its hunger. I didn't want to move. My body, usually restless in the mornings, had settled into a stillness that felt more like waiting. Her sleeping form didn't stir, but I could sense the way her hand twitched slightly beneath the blanket, the way her toes flexed occasionally, as if her body was waking before her mind. I listened to her breathe for what felt like hours. There was no rush, no pressure to be anywhere. The retreat enforced silence and space, but I was discovering that sometimes silence was the most deafening sound of all. We went through the day like drifting satellites. I saw her during walking meditation, our paths crossing without contact. She passed by me barefoot on the trail, her hair twisted into a loose knot, her arms swinging softly at her sides. Her expression was unreadable, serene, but her eyes caught mine for a split second, long enough to spark something hot and cold in my belly. I lowered my gaze immediately, as though I'd been caught doing something I hadn't even realized I was doing. My face flushed, and I turned sharply, unsure whether to flee or stay rooted. Later, we were assigned to a group exercise, mindful movement, bodies synchronized without speech. She stood across from me in the circle, and I couldn't look away. Her gestures were fluid, deliberate, her focus total. I mirrored her without meaning to. Every tilt of her head, every reach of her arms felt like a personal invitation. I moved as she moved, the distance between us dissolving into something invisible but charged. When the session ended, we bowed to each other, palms together, and I felt the burn of her closeness linger in my chest long after we stepped apart. That night, the forest breathed more deeply than usual. I sat cross-legged just outside our tent, wrapped in my shawl, letting the cool night air bite at my skin. The stars were muted behind a thin veil of cloud, and the only light came from the flickering flame of a small candle placed on a nearby tree stump. I could hear her inside the tent, moving slowly, the soft rustle of fabric, the creak of the mat beneath her weight. My hands trembled slightly in my lap, not from cold, but from the tension that had begun to coil and expand within me. When I finally returned to the tent, the air inside was warmer. She was already lying down, facing away, her body curled gently in sleep. I slid into my sleeping bag without a sound, positioning myself in the same direction. Our mats were close, almost touching, and I could feel the gentle rise and fall of her back through the space between us. I inhaled slowly through my nose, held it, then exhaled through my mouth, matching her rhythm, breath for breath, inhale for inhale. The boundary of her presence began to dissolve. In the dark, sensation sharpened. I became hyper-aware of everything, the weight of the air, the damp scent of leaves on our clothes, the residual heat of my body where hers had nearly touched mine hours before. Every cell in me felt like it was moving toward her, trembling with restraint. And then, without thinking, without planning, my hand slipped from beneath my blanket and found the edge of her mat. Just enough to feel the pressure of proximity. Just enough to say, I am here. She didn't move, but her breath paused, barely, a beat too long. Then it resumed, slower, deeper, and that single pause was louder than any word I had ever heard. I froze, unsure if I had imagined it, unsure if this was a line I had merely invented or one I had just crossed. I spent the rest of the night floating somewhere between sleep and awareness, in that hazy space where boundaries blur. Dreams crept in, slow, vivid, abstract things. Her eyes hovering above me, her hands brushing against my spine, her mouth parting slightly in the half-light. I woke multiple times, heart pounding, body burning with heat that had nowhere to go. I kept my hands clenched at my sides, willing myself into stillness, but stillness was a lie. Inside, everything was shaking. By dawn, I was exhausted. I sat up as the sky turned from indigo to gray, running my fingers through my hair and breathing in the cool morning air. She stirred, stretching like a cat, spine arching, limbs reaching. Our eyes met as she sat up. Nothing was said, nothing needed to be. The breath between us was different now, thicker, shared. I went to brush my teeth by the stream, scooping cold water into my mouth, spitting it out with trembling fingers. The reflection in the water looked like mine, but felt like someone else, someone on the edge of something, someone dangerously awake. I didn't know what she felt. I didn't know what I wanted, but I knew one thing with certainty. My breath no longer belonged to me alone. It had found its twin, and it lived in the tent beside mine. It began with the rain. It was late, somewhere between midnight and the hour when the body forgets how to rest, and the forest outside our tent groaned with water. I woke to the steady drumming of droplets against the canvas, a soft, rhythmic pulse that seemed to echo my own heartbeat. The air was damp and cool, and even inside my sleeping bag I felt the chill creeping in through the seams. I turned over slowly, trying not to disturb the quiet, and found myself facing her silhouette. She was awake. I didn't need to see her eyes to know. There was a stillness to her body, but it wasn't the stillness of sleep. It was the careful, deliberate stillness of someone who didn't want to be caught thinking. Her back was to me, her breathing slower than usual, but too conscious. I watched the gentle rise and fall of her shoulders beneath the thin blanket and wondered what kept her from sleep. The same thing that kept me, maybe. The same tension strung too tightly between our mats, vibrating in the dark. The rain intensified. A slow leak formed in the corner of the tent, dripping in fat, cold drops that splashed against the vinyl floor. I heard the subtle shift of her weight as she turned toward me, pulling her blanket tighter. Without thinking, I scooted an inch closer, then another. I told myself it was for warmth, that the cold was justification enough, but my body betrayed me with its anticipation. The scent of her, earthy, clean, something floral but muted, seeped into me like a slow drug. My fingers twitched against the edge of my sleeping bag. We were close now. So close I could feel the heat radiating from her skin. A whisper of breath brushed against my cheek. The space between us was a thread, thin and fragile, stretched to its limit. One more movement and it would snap, or tighten, or tangle. I wasn't sure which terrified me more. And then it happened. A touch. Barely. Her knee brushed against mine beneath the layers. Accidental, maybe, but she didn't move away. She stilled, her breath catching just slightly. That tiny hitch sent a wave through me like a signal sent from her body into mine. My throat tightened. I held my breath, afraid to break the moment, afraid to shatter the strange suspended reality that had formed in the dark. Her knee pressed again, more deliberate this time. It lingered, warm, present. I responded without thought. My hand slipped from the confines of the blanket and landed softly between us, open, waiting. I felt the weight of her gaze, even in the darkness. Then, slowly, cautiously, her fingers touched mine. One at a time, as though testing the temperature of a pool she wasn't sure she should enter. Our palms met, not interlocked, just pressed together, skin to skin. The contact was electric, not fiery, not sharp, but alive, pulsing. Her thumb stroked the edge of mine once, and my entire body tensed with restraint. The silence swelled, not empty, but thick with breath and the knowledge that something irreversible had just begun. She moved closer, inch by inch, until our bodies touched in more places, her forehead against my cheek, her legs curling around mine, her arm sliding beneath my shoulder. We were still clothed, still technically modest, but the intimacy of the moment dissolved all those distinctions. I could feel the soft swell of her chest rising against my side, her breath moist and warm on my neck. My hands found her back, tentative at first, then braver, fingers tracing the curve of her spine. She didn't flinch. She melted into me like we had always belonged in this shape. This alignment. My face tilted down, hers up. The smallest shift brought our mouths within a breath of contact. And then, just barely, our lips touched. Not a kiss, a moment, a communion. The press of her mouth against mine was soft and unsure, trembling with the weight of what it meant. I felt her hesitation mirrored in my own, but neither of us pulled back. We stayed like that, lips brushing, tasting, learning, until the nerves faded and hunger took its place. The second kiss was different, deeper, anchored. My hand slid into her hair, gripping gently as her fingers found my waist. Our mouths moved in slow rhythm, seeking something we hadn't let ourselves want before now. Her body curved into mine, and I welcomed her fully. All hesitation dissolved by the heat building between us. I felt her thighs press against my hip, her breath becoming ragged, her body trembling, not from fear, but from want. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Every breath, every movement was a sentence, a confession. I rolled onto my back and she followed, laying half on top of me, her hands exploring cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. I felt her palm press against my stomach, slipping beneath the hem of my shirt. Her fingers were warm and light as they skimmed my skin. My breath hitched, and she paused, waiting for permission that I gave with a slight arch of my back and a soft exhale into her mouth. I reached for her in return, letting my hands memorize the curve of her waist, the dip of her lower back, the firmness of her thighs as they straddled me. Our bodies moved together in quiet urgency, still layered in clothing, but already bare in every other way. I felt myself unravel beneath her, slowly, deliberately, like fabric being pulled apart one thread at a time. And when her mouth left mine and traveled downward, over my throat, across my collarbone, I closed my eyes and let the moment consume me. Her lips were reverent, her tongue soft and insistent. I dug my fingers into her back, clinging to the only thing I could be sure of, that this was real, that this was happening, that the line between us had not just been crossed, but erased. The rain continued outside, a steady heartbeat against the world, as inside the tent, two women rediscovered what it meant to breathe, together, not perfectly, not without fear, but with truth, with fire. And when we finally stilled, tangled and raw, I knew that something fundamental had shifted. There would be no returning to what we were before. We had crossed the threshold, and everything that followed would carry the scent, the taste, the memory of this night. Morning came without warning, soft and pale, the kind of morning that seeps into the tent, like a whispered reminder that time still moves, no matter what has happened in the dark. I stirred slowly, my limbs heavy with the kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from physical exertion, but from something deeper, more intimate. My eyes blinked open to the blurred texture of canvas above me, and it took a moment to remember where I was, where we were. Then the weight of her breath reached me again, warm and steady near my shoulder, and everything came rushing back. We hadn't spoken. There were no words exchanged before we drifted into sleep, our bodies still tangled, blankets disheveled and half forgotten. I didn't know if she had fallen asleep first or if she had watched me the same way I'd watched her earlier in the retreat, memorizing the slope of her nose or the curve of her lips as her breathing slowed. But now, in the pale hush of early morning, she was still beside me, her body close enough that I could feel the heat rising off her skin, even though neither of us was touching anymore. I didn't move. I was afraid to, afraid that the smallest shift would wake her and break the fragile sense of peace still hanging in the air. Instead, I lay there and watched the light grow stronger, filtering through the canvas, casting slow-moving shadows across the walls. The silence between us had changed. It wasn't the same emptiness it had been in the early days of the retreat. Now it felt full, like it was holding something for us, something unspoken, unnamed, but undeniably real. Eventually, she stirred. A quiet inhale, a soft stretch. Her hand brushed my arm, light as breath. I held still, feigning sleep, too uncertain to meet her gaze, too unsure of what expression I'd find on her face. Regret? Confusion? Indifference? But there was no sudden retreat, no sharp intake of breath, no movement away from me. Just the soft rustle of fabric as she sat up, pulled on a sweatshirt, and unzipped the tent flap to let the morning air in. She left without a sound. I waited for a few minutes before sitting up, wrapping the blanket around my shoulders. My body ached in subtle, beautiful ways. Not sore exactly, but loosened, softened, like something inside me had been unlocked. I sat cross-legged in the tent for a while, letting the cool breeze wash over my bare skin where it peeked out from the blanket, grounding myself in the ordinary strangeness of the moment. The retreat was still happening. The world had not stopped, but something in me had shifted irreversibly. When I finally stepped outside, the camp was already moving. People walked the paths in quiet, purposeful steps. Some carried nugs of tea or sat beneath trees, meditating with eyes closed and hands resting gently in their laps. I passed by them like a ghost, floating just slightly above the ground, not fully present in my body. My mind was still in the tent, in the heat of her breath, in the echo of her mouth on mine. She was nowhere in sight. The day unfolded in silence, as all the days did, but nothing about it felt the same. I sat through group meditation without hearing a word of the instructor's soft voice. The chanting in the distant temple became background noise to my own internal monologue. During yoga, my body moved through the motions, but my focus was scattered. I kept catching glimpses of her out of the corner of my eye, her profile in a line of seated participants, the curve of her shoulder as she adjusted her posture, the hem of her shirt brushing her hips as she bent forward into child's pose. She never looked at me. And yet I felt her, always, like a new layer of skin I didn't yet know how to wear. Everything around me felt sharper, louder, the crunch of my feet on gravel, the wind sighing through pine needles, the whisper of a robe as someone walked by. My senses had awakened in ways I hadn't expected. My body, too. I was hyper-aware of every movement, every brush of fabric against my thighs, every inhalation that didn't belong to her. That evening, we crossed paths again, briefly, unintentionally. She was coming down the hill toward the fire circle just as I was leaving. Our eyes met for half a second. She didn't smile, neither did I, but something flickered between us. Not gone, not burned out, just paused. Back in the tent, I sat on my mat in the growing dark. She arrived after me, quiet as always. I expected her to avoid eye contact, to turn away, to wrap herself in sleep and pretend nothing had happened. But she sat down cross-legged, facing away from me, and began to braid her hair. Slowly, methodically. The silence thickened again, not with tension, but with weight, memory, possibility. I watched her hands move, twisting strands together with calm precision. My heart beat so loudly I was sure she could hear it. We didn't speak. We didn't touch. But the air between us pulsed with everything we'd done, everything we hadn't said. I lay down, facing the wall, waiting for sleep that wouldn't come. I could feel her presence behind me, her breath, her stillness. And in that breath, I felt everything. Her uncertainty, her hesitation, her desire. I didn't reach for her that night. I didn't dare. The moment had passed. Or perhaps it was just waiting. But lying there in the dark, I knew one thing for certain. There was no going back, not to before, not to how I had seen her or myself or silence. Something had opened inside me, something that couldn't be unlearned, undone, or neatly folded back into a box labeled experience. I was no longer here just to retreat. I was here to return, not to who I'd been, but to something truer, something more terrifying. I closed my eyes, curled my fingers into the sleeping bag, and breathed. Her breath followed a second later, and for now, that was enough. The days had begun to lose their shape. I no longer knew what day it was or how many had passed since the night the world tilted under our tent. Time moved differently now, slower, weightless, suspended between silences. I woke with her breath in my lungs, with the curve of her absence molded into the mat beside mine. Each morning, I told myself to forget. Each morning, I failed a little more beautifully. That morning, the fog was thick. It rolled through the trees like a living thing, wrapping its arms around the camp, quieting even the birds. I walked the path to the meadow barefoot, the earth damp and cold under my feet, grounding me. My body ached, not with pain, but with memory. The kind of ache that comes from being seen too closely, from being touched without armor. I felt open in a way that made every movement feel like a confession. The retreat was entering its final stretch, and the structure of the days had become muscle memory. Meditation, walking, yoga, silence. During the walking meditation, I followed a narrow trail through the trees, eyes half closed, breath matched to the rhythm of my steps. Others moved slowly ahead and behind me, but they didn't matter. Only she did. I could feel her, not near me, but not far. The pull between us hadn't lessened. If anything, it had deepened. It was quieter now, more restrained, but no less potent. The silence we were instructed to honor had become a veil we both tugged on from opposite ends, never enough to tear it, but enough to feel its tension. In the yoga session, I rolled out my mat beneath the high branches of an oak. The filtered light dappled across my arms and legs. She arrived late, choosing a spot 2 rows behind me. I didn't look. I didn't need to. I felt her settle onto her mat like a stone dropped into water. Every pose that followed was done with her in mind. Every stretch, every bend, every breath felt like a way of saying her name without sound. I moved through the flow slowly, deliberately, aware of my body as something newly foreign and familiar all at once. My shirt clung to the sweat on my back. My thighs trembled under the hold of Warrior 2. The instructor's voice was soft, guiding us inward, but I wasn't inward. I was behind me. I was with her. I wondered if she was watching. I wondered if she moved with the same restraint, if the pulse in her neck was as fast as mine. I longed to hear her breath, to know if she was breathing for herself or for me. When the class ended, I lingered. Others gathered their mats and wandered off toward the tea station, but I sat cross-legged in the fading sun, letting my pulse settle, my spine lengthen, my thoughts roam without discipline. She passed behind me, just close enough for the scent of her to brush against me like fabric. I didn't turn, I didn't move, but my body reacted anyway, tightening, burning, pleading for more. That evening, during the final group meditation, we sat in a circle under a large wooden pavilion. The structure was open on all sides, the forest breathing in and out around us. We were instructed to keep our eyes closed, to focus on our breath, to let the sounds of the world move through us. I tried, I really did, but every inhale carried her name, every exhale her touch. I couldn't separate the memory of her skin from the present moment. I didn't want to. At one point, I opened my eyes, just for a second, and she was already looking at me, across the circle, straight through the others. Her gaze didn't flinch. It didn't soften. It held me in place like a hand pressed against my chest. I looked away, ashamed of the flush that rose to my cheeks, of the want that pulsed between my thighs without invitation. Later that night, the tent felt too small, not because of the space, but because of the quiet. It was too loud, too full of everything unsaid. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, listening to her shift on her mat, a soft sigh, the stretch of limbs, the rustle of fabric against skin. My fingers dug into my blanket. My body remembered her in vivid, aching detail, the places she had touched, the way her breath had hitched against my collarbone, the sound she made when she came, low and quiet and trembling. She turned over. I knew without looking. Her body faced mine now. There was only a foot of space between us, but it felt infinite. I could have reached out, could have touched her wrist, brushed her knuckles, whispered with my skin that I hadn't forgotten, that I didn't want to, but I didn't move. I let the silence stretch. Eventually, I sat up and stepped outside. The night air was cold and sharp, biting at my exposed arms. I walked barefoot to the edge of the forest and sat on a low rock, the sky above choked with stars. Somewhere behind me, she was still lying in the tent, still not speaking, still breathing. And I hated how much I loved her for that, for not pretending, for not forcing a resolution, for letting the silence carry weight, meaning, danger. There's a kind of love that doesn't bloom with words or declarations. It lives in movement, in restraint, in the way someone doesn't touch you when they want to, in the way they leave space for your ache to be seen. I sat in that ache, let it fill me, overflow, then settle like sediment at the bottom of my ribs. When I finally returned to the tent, she was asleep, or pretending to be. I slid into my sleeping bag, pulled it up to my chin, and lay still, facing the center. Her face was turned toward me, eyes closed, mouth parted. I studied the softness of her features, the tiny twitch of her eyelids, the crease between her brows. I imagined pressing my lips to it, smoothing it with my thumb, whispering forgiveness for needing her so much. But I did nothing. I let the moment pass, watched her breath rise and fall, and joined it with my own. The silence stayed, but now it moved with us. It had a pulse, a breath, a name we dared not speak. The morning felt stretched thin, translucent like the space between dreaming and waking, where reality hasn't fully settled in, and everything still shimmers with the weight of what it could have been. I opened my eyes to the soft gray light bleeding through the canvas. The air was still, but not in a peaceful way, in a hollow, aftersound kind of way. I turned my head and saw her mat empty. No crumpled blanket, no pillow dented from the shape of her head, no smell of skin or hair or breath left in the air. Just a single paper bag crushed in the corner. Inside it, a couple of dry mandarin peels and a chewed piece of gum pressed into the paper like a fossil. I stared at that bag for a long time, my mind looping useless thoughts, unable to settle on one. Maybe she never existed. Maybe she had been a fever dream of pine needles and isolation. But the ache between my thighs told a different story. The soreness in my chest, the burn in my lungs, the ghost of her tongue still slick against the folds of my memory. My body had not imagined her. My skin could not have conjured that hunger on its own. She had been here, fully, violently, quietly. I got up without urgency. Every move felt like walking on the scorched ground after the fire had moved through. I put on a hoodie, didn't bother with underwear, and stepped barefoot out into the cool morning. The camp was quiet, and the world felt indecently ordinary. Somewhere, someone was ringing the meditation bell. Someone else was boiling water for tea. But all I could feel was her absence, echoing like a scream I wasn't allowed to release. I walked to the lake. The same lake where she had once stripped beside me, her back pale under the sun, water glistening on her thighs. I walked into it fully clothed, the water sharp against my skin, pulling my breath up into my throat. I dunked myself beneath the surface, let it close over me like a shroud. I wanted to rinse her from me, wash her off, unmake myself. But when I surfaced, I saw my reflection, and I didn't recognize the woman looking back. Her eyes were hollowed, her mouth parted like she had been trying to speak and forgot how. Hair clinging wet to her cheeks, nipples hard beneath soaked fabric, thighs twitching from remembered pressure. I stood in the water and trembled, not from cold, but from the unbearable knowledge that I had let someone inside me so fully, so recklessly, that I no longer knew where I ended and she began. After the retreat, I couldn't go home. I couldn't sit in my kitchen with its bland ceramic mugs and empty refrigerator and pretend that nothing had happened. I drifted instead. I wandered streets I'd never walked before, touched strangers on the shoulder under the pretense of brushing past, searching their skin for the heat I'd lost. I walked through stores with no intention of buying anything, just to be surrounded by other bodies. I stared too long at women younger than me, hoping, dreading, but none of them had her hips, her hands, her quiet violence. They were smooth where she had been jagged, empty where she had been consuming. Then one day, I saw her. Through the glass of a yoga studio, like a mirage, she was barefoot, her hair up in a messy knot, wearing leggings that clung to every curve I remembered. Her back was to me. She was laughing. That sound, even muffled through glass, slammed into me like a punch. She turned slightly, her profile lighting up with the kind of smile that doesn't come from memory, but from something new. Beside her stood a girl, 19, maybe 20, soft, naive. She reached out and ran her fingers along Maya's stomach. Maya didn't flinch, didn't move away. She looked at the girl with the same eyes she had looked at me that night in the tent, steady, devouring, full of promise and destruction. And in that moment, I understood. I had never been special. I was not a revelation. I was a vessel, a container for her hunger, a way station on the road she wandered barefoot and hungry, feeding on affection, on attention, on skin. She had passed through me like a storm, quick, hot, and untraceable. She didn't leave wounds. She left residues, stains, permanent fingerprints on the walls of your most private rooms. I wasn't her lover. I was her terrain, explored, conquered, abandoned. I walked into the nearest cafe and locked myself in the bathroom. The walls were beige and trembling. I sat on the toilet, trembling too. My bag slid from my shoulder, hit the tile with a dull sound, and spilled open. Among the debris, lip balm, receipts, keys, was the handkerchief, the one she had used to wipe herself the first night. I had kept it, unwashed, folded neatly like a relic. I had told myself it was accidental, that I had forgotten it was there, that I would throw it out, but I hadn't. I picked it up, unfolded it slowly, reverently. It still smelled faintly of her. Sweat, skin, shame. I pressed it to my face, inhaled. Then, with a desperation I didn't know I was capable of, I shoved it into my mouth. Deeper, farther. I gagged but didn't stop. My eyes watered, my jaw ached, but I didn't stop. I wanted to choke on her memory, swallow it, consume her the way she had consumed me. I wanted to punish myself with the one thing I couldn't stop wanting. I sucked on the cloth like it was her tongue, her sex, her goodbye. Eventually, I slid the fabric out, panting, dizzy. My reflection in the mirror looked ruined and awake. I washed my face, reapplied lipstick with trembling fingers, and smiled into the mirror like nothing had happened. My face held. My voice, when I tested it, was steady. I zipped up my bag, flushed the toilet, and stepped back into the cafe like I had just used the bathroom. I walked out into the world. Now I know who I am. I am the woman she burned to the ground and left smoldering. The woman who carries her inside, not as a lover, but as a parasite I cannot evict. And I will never tell anyone what she did to me. Because the worst part isn't that she used me, it's that I liked it.